Are you the kind of person that wants to know what time it is or how the watch is made?
Hello and welcome to Housing Insiders, the podcast for founders, builders, lenders, and regulators, and anyone who believes that everyone should be well housed. I'm Jonathan Lawless.
And I'm Jeremy Potter. On Housing Insiders, we're hosting the conversations you won't hear anywhere else about how to make housing more innovative and attainable.
And we're really proud to partner again with Built Rewards to bring you these conversations. As always, if you've got an idea for a guest or a special show or have an interest in sponsoring, you can always get to us by emailing podcast@thehousinginsiders.com.
And if you like the show, please give us the review and spread the word, because that's how we can make more of these podcast episodes for you.
Before we get into today's episode, Jeremy, I wanted to share with you a brief thing, which is a good friend of mine, Steve Holden at Fannie Mae, who's just become an AI genius, has really taught me how to use this tool called Notebook LM, which you guys have probably heard of. But the cool thing that you could do about it is, like, you can upload a bunch of documents and then have it create a podcast, which I think we've talked about on the show before. But anyway, I did it with a lot of Kristin's work, and we'll get into that in a second. And then I've been listening to the podcast because it's been great, right? It's a great way to sort of like summarize the work and like have a great way of learning it. But the thing that really got me is like this Google generated, AI generated podcast. It always starts with like, "Hello and welcome back to Deep Insights, the podcast for people that want to stay on the edge of what's happening." And I'm like, oh God, like, does everybody sound like that? And like, I mean, number one, it's impressive that it manages to mimic that to such a degree. But number two is like, I don't want to fucking do that anymore. Like, how do I start this so I'm not like every other podcast in the world? Anyway, we'll rework our intro.
I think also I've noticed Notebook LM in particular, they sound a little bit like a hybrid of podcast and morning drive DJs somehow. Yeah. I don't know why that is, but that seems to be the other kind of tone of voice that we try to avoid here.
Well, this podcast would have introduced our guest today as Kristin Messerli, but I will introduce her as Kristin Messerli, which I think is the right pronunciation. Kristin, tell me if Google beat me to it. But anyway, Kristin is the co-founder and executive director of FirstHome IQ, a not-for-profit focusing on homeownership education, especially for the younger generations. Kristin, leading strategist, speaker on these trends in next generation housing and financial wellness. She is always informative every time I get a chance to talk to her. So super happy to have her on.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, excited to be here.
Oh, excellent. Well, we can't wait to dive in. I mean, you are the expert in this industry about speaking to first-time homebuyers in particular, and the generational issues that come with running a business in mortgage and real estate, and also selling to customers across a housing spectrum that can be pretty complicated. Everything from an entry-level employee getting their first job who's going to try to own a home, all the way to downsizing, retiring. We have to serve consumers everywhere in between. And so I think what we're going to dig into today is your cutting edge research, year after year, putting out the NextGen Homebuyer Report. And then obviously can't wait to hear all the insights that we can apply through FirstHome IQ as well. So excited to have you, Kristin. Thank you.
Yeah, and I've listened to your research many times in the drive. I want to start with maybe a softball question, because you've been doing this research for a while in this survey. What in this recent round was the thing that surprised you the most?
Okay, so I'm really excited about, like, this report is the one I'm most excited about ever doing. And I've surveyed now close to 8,000 Millennial and Gen Z, done, I don't know how many reports. And, but what was interesting is we were able to layer, not just, this one's focused on financial literacy, but we were layering on that psychology and, behaviors. And we were able to, I think, narrow into an area that's really interesting, where we're, of course, seeing declining trust across all different industries, but seeing how that's playing into the way that we approach housing and education, especially around financial education, is really interesting, and AI specifically. So I think, we can get into all of these different areas, but one of the big surprises to me, it wasn't surprising, but it was astounding, I guess, to see that I think it was 71% use TikTok for research around home buying. And of course, when you look at the declining trust in lenders and loan officers paired with this increase in trust for influencers, 41% said they turned to influencers for home buyer research. Then you start to see like people are going to AI, they're going to influencers. There's this peer-to-peer revolution along with AI that I think creates a really interesting environment for the way that we approach financial literacy education today.
Yeah, there's always this idea within trust of certainly the source of the information, but it makes me think of like whenever you have a pretty experienced group of people being sold to. I feel like millennials and Gen Z, more so than almost ever before, have grown up being sold to and are super comfortable with the idea. Everybody's trying to sell me something all the time. And with that comes this question of like, now what do I do? Who do I trust and why if my disposition is that I'm being sold to constantly? So why is it that the salesperson then becomes less trusted? Is it just that because their agenda is to sell me? They're not going to tell me the truth. How did you hear, or what did you hear from respondents on specifically the salesperson?
Yeah, I think with this rise in access to information, it creates a different kind of, at least like a feeling of parity with the salesperson. They're not seeing the salesperson as the go-to expert. They could, and that's, we can get into that, but I think that there's a need to like prove themselves because they have so much access to information. I also think that we've seen with this new, transparency information, we've seen a bunch of scandals. We've had a lot happen in our world over the last couple of decades that creates skepticism. Not starting, but a big one being the financial crisis of 2008. There's just going to be a layer of skepticism there that exists. But yeah, I think that this like desire to validate information, it's not that they're going to the influencers, like you said, and thinking like, oh, I trust everything you say. It's that now they have a bunch of people to validate information that they can go to as sources. So, they go to Reddit, they go to TikTok, they go to all these places, and then they form their own opinion. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
That's interesting. I'm glad you said that they're not going to these social media sites because they trust them, right? Because again, it's like not everything the internet will tell you, and particularly as I've watched lots of TikTok on housing, like it's certainly not all true. But I like how you said it. They're sort of like triangulating to get to their own opinion. Just to dig down and dig into the trust issue a little bit more, right? So I'm trying to figure out, I guess, I think I know what we're saying, but like, if you were to say like, do you trust your spouse? Like what you're really saying is like, do you trust they're not going to Coldplay concerts with their boss, right? Like, you get my point. They're not doing something with somebody else, right? When you don't trust your loan officer or you don't trust your realtor, is the point that people are saying is like what Jeremy was saying, like this person has their own agenda. They're trying to sell me something. So I can't trust them to put my interest ahead of their own. Is that the distrust that they have? Or is it just, I don't know, like, is that how you would frame their distrust?
Yeah, I think from anecdotal evidence that it's around this feeling that, that of course you're going to tell me that because it's your job to tell me that, like you are incentivized to tell me that it's a good idea to buy a home right now. And, so I think that there's that feeling. And I don't think necessarily, like for me, I have that skepticism in me. And it's not that I think that you're a bad person. It's just that that's what you're programmed to tell me. So but I think that there's some of that. We asked in the annual report this year in January and last January, we tried to drill in on the trust and ask like something about like helping me make smart decisions about my mortgage, or for the realtor, helping me make smart decisions about buying a home, and get really specific. And the trust number declined. So I don't know if it's, I think people don't feel confident that until you've proved yourself to be worthy of that trust.
Yeah. I mean, the numbers are profound. I mean, only 20% of people trust loan officers. I mean, it's like, it's really profoundly bad. But I think as you framed it, I guess maybe saying only 20% of people aren't skeptical of their loan officers sounds a little more nice for loan officers who might be listening to the show. It's just that nobody's going to blindly trust you. It's going to require more.
And I think it creates a huge opportunity. I don't think it's a bad thing, period, because people are wanting to take ownership over their decisions. They're wanting to make smart decisions. we should come back to that though, because they don't have actually the knowledge like you had said. But the fact that they want that is really great. Also, we see on the extremes that they perform worse when they are of super not trusting, but also when they have all the trust, they perform worse on the financial literacy quizzes. So I think that's interesting to look at too.
Yeah. So you need, it sounds like, sort of a diverse inputs of information to make yourself feel confident enough that you can stand up in the conversation, right? So the example I would use is like, I feel completely insecure talking to a car mechanic because I have absolutely no clue what that machine does and how it works. And I am fully at their mercy, so to speak, right? And so I would need to then watch all the YouTube videos and learn a lot to be able to have an intelligent conversation about what's going on. Or I just find somebody who I do trust and then hope that I'm not getting ripped off. And what you're saying is like Gen Z millennials, there isn't that experience as much of saying like, I'm going to trust this person because they're in my community or I know them, even though the vast majority of loan officers and real estate agents still are in the community. And so they don't have time, it seems, to spend, even though all we hear is like, spend time in the community, get your word out there, you're not supposed to be in the office, you're supposed to be out there. And yet there doesn't seem to be enough interaction or time spent with younger people in order to gain that experience I have with my mechanic. Is that
There's
what
so
we're
many.
struggling with as an industry?
Yeah, I think there's so many implications here of like what you can do to build trust, showing up in the communities, partnering with people that are already trusted. But I also think, yeah, if you send someone a link to your reviews, even, I mean, it adds so much trust for me to be able to go through and be like, oh, okay, all these different people feel this way. Doesn't mean I trust everyone that's left a review. It just means it builds something, and then if I see I think it's a great idea for everyone listening to think about what's an area of like an industry that you don't trust. And so like thinking of the car mechanic is a great example for me as well. But like, what would have built that trust? Would it have been that this person does a lot of education? I don't, thinking about those areas. But one thing that I found really recently that hit me with a doctor, I don't have a lot of trust in doctors. So I've done a ton of research finding, a specialist in this area I needed. And when I saw him, he provided a lot of education, but two, he was like, and this is some information you can put into ChatGPT, ask, he like encouraged me to go out into ChatGPT, come back to him with more questions. And I loved that, like partnering with the resources, people are already using, and it just kind of helps that builds trust too, not pushing away from like, don't check ChatGPT, don't go to TikTok. It's like, here's some great resources for you.
That's a great insight. And one of the things I was struggling with when I was reading the numbers, and then I think I've made sense of it. Would love for you to confirm it. Is like, you ask one question about it, who do you turn to first about home buying? And family and friends is like still top, but then the next two categories were professionals, like mortgage professionals, realtors, or whatever. That was next. And I was trying to figure out what the order of operation is. Do you talk to a realtor first and then go on social media, or do you start with social media? And it seemed like social media, you don't start with social media. You kind of start with an engagement, and then you're going and you're validating that afterwards. Is that the order of operation that typically happens in, or is it not
Yeah,
that cut and dry?
I think it's different phases of what that social media looks like. Like a lot of people actually, and women tend to do this more, go to Zillow first or Redfin or whatever. They're going on these platforms and they're just looking at homes thinking, I don't know whether this is, the time that I want to do this. And then they're going to YouTube, they're finding things on TikTok, they're being, served different topics. And then they might reach out to a realtor, and then they're doing more serious research after that. And it's a different kind of thing. One is dreaming, and the second is starting to really take action.
Got it.
In this version, it sounds like in this version of the report, you were digging more into that confidence. How much do you have? What gives you that confidence? And then some of the other things that play into that. Did you find respondents that said, once I was confident, then I did XYZ? or was it all just about getting to confidence?
That's interesting. I would like to explore that in the next. We do a survey every January, so that could be something that we add into the next annual report. What we looked at for this one that we're publishing like next week is basically looking at where trust overlays with education, which is resulting in, where we can come up with ideas on what that means. But I think, yeah, like where do people, I think that would be a really interesting next step with this.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I'm curious, Chris. I think maybe a year or two ago we talked about this because I was exploring TikTok and some of the other social media platforms to see what's really out there. How would you get information? I think a lot of what I found was mostly like realtors talking about home shopping. Like that was probably the closest thing. Maybe occasional loan officer. YouTube's got so much stuff on it. So I'm just kind of curious. Like people are using these platforms more and more. Is the content there on these platforms? I mean, like what are you seeing? Is it improving from when I've last like been disappointed in it?
Yes, it is improving quite a bit. There's a lot of not a lot, but there's some realtors that are really just doing well on TikTok with like funny videos. Like people's personalities are coming out more and that's what people are following. Some people are really out there, some people provide, just great education, but you're seeing I think a lot better content that exists. Of course, you're still seeing a lot of really disappointing content, so I shouldn't overpromise when with what you will see out there. But yeah, I do think it's getting better, and I think one thing that was really interesting in this report was looking at kind of going back to the confidence. There's a lot of overwhelm, and this is something I've suspected for a long time. But over half of our respondents said that they felt overwhelmed by the financial information because of complexity, and over half were delaying financial decisions because of their overwhelm. So I think looking at like we need to be out there talking about financial literacy and making it easier. And what I am seeing on TikTok is usually the good stuff anyway is not using jargon. They're not using they're making it really plain language, easy to follow, and connecting with people. So I think that's really working towards reducing that overwhelm.
That's really interesting to me because it goes into a lot of the psychology of financial literacy that you dug into with this report. And one of the things that I pulled away from the top insights, 72% wish financial resources were designed in a simpler, more intuitive way. And I'm curious if you see that as, is there a relationship between the influencers we're talking about and the content John asked about and like where it feeds into tools? Meaning these are like separate, almost entirely separate universes right now. We have influencers and information on these tools that we're talking about, and then we have actual apps and solutions, and they don't seem to be, there's no bridge, I guess is what I'm getting at. And I'm wondering if you've seen, if you're taking away any insights about how to design the influencer content better, but then also how to feed that into better designed solutions as well. It just seems like there's a big disconnect.
Yeah, there's such a disconnect. And one thing that we didn't prominently put in there, but I asked about neurodivergence, and a third of people identify as neurodivergent in some way, ADHD, dyslexia, whatever. And I think, looking at the way our brains work and also thinking about the complexity of information, the amount of information, like we're all having a little bit of ADHD. I have a lot of it, but like thinking about how that reflects in the content, it's not matching up, and I think I would love to see at FirstHome IQ we've created content that's like better visually designed, simplicity, has all of those components. But what I'm really interested in is how we empower loan officers and professionals in the industry and educators to simplify things themselves and create better content. And I would love to, as kind of a next phase in our development with FirstHome IQ, to actually pair up with influencers and help them create better content or support others in creating content like that. Because I do think, like you said, those are two totally different worlds right now.
In some ways it's hard to merge those worlds. And I will say, if you can find an influencer who can make the concept of an escrow account fun, I would like to hire them because it's just, there's an aspect of home buying that's like, hey, did you know you could buy a home for just 3% down? And like, that's truly informational. As your report shows, like, I think only 8% of people know that you don't need 20% down, right? So like, that's an important piece of information, and it can be made fun. The rest of the information is more complicated and just not, it just doesn't suit the medium as much as it does, like, you want that medium to draw them in, but then you need to get serious about stuff because you're just never going to be able to get through the quantity of information you need to think about. I don't know, maybe I'm just thinking
No,
out
so
loud a little.
I actually think, and I'd be curious both of your thoughts on this, but I actually think that we don't need to get into details with financial literacy education in general, except for when it comes to home buyer education, I would say. Like talking about down payment, the fact that less than 10% of people could answer that, that question correctly about down payment is really important. We've been talking about, down payment a lot as I think us as professionals, but it's still not getting out there. And I wonder if we just focus on the basic things, talk about affordability strategies, talk about investment strategies, these types of things, and then the professional is who is guiding them through what an escrow account is, what the steps are that they're going to take. They don't need to know that going into the process.
It certainly keeps the professional and the expert more relevant than I think a lot of people would otherwise imply. We hear it all the time. Oh, technology is going to displace the expert. Technology is going to take over. They talk about technology as this kind of like amorphous Death Star that just comes out of the atmosphere and like solves all of these really complicated problems. And what you're saying is actually, no, don't think of it that way. Let the expert handle the minutia once you're in process of doing this. Getting to the process can be a lot more straightforward. And we've got people out there explaining things like day trading and crypto and other stuff in pretty straightforward ways. Now, that doesn't mean it's always healthy, right? There's just as many charlatans in that sphere as there are in the YouTubes and TikToks of real estate, right? But the idea that we could make this a lot simpler. I mean, one of the things I'm always fascinated by in your work, Kristen, is has the financial benefit of home ownership remained a strong argument for home ownership? Because for me, every time I read this report, it feels like first time home buyers are realizing more and more that it's an emotional decision more so than a financial decision. I mean, it's an incredibly complicated financial decision, but the reason people want to do it tends to be emotional rather than, oh, this is a great investment. We've kind of gone away from the great investment argument in a lot of ways. Are you seeing those shifts as well?
Absolutely, from consumers. And but I still hear professionals talk about the financial benefit all the time. And I think there's something there. I think that that is important, but you can't talk about the house that you bought in 1985 and think that someone's going to relate to that today, because we are absolutely in a very different world. Buying a home today is not going to have the same, returns that you had back then. So I really want us to be careful about how we're talking about homeownership as an investment. There's a lot of other benefits to homeownership that are, create stability, that create, I don't know, home in a really important way to millennials and Gen Z and first time buyers, that we can talk about all of it.
I love that point. I'll tell a quick story. I was dealing with a customer who was interested in buying a home. They were like, can you help me think through the financial aspects of rent versus buy? And so, I pulled out my trusty Excel spreadsheet and I ran it through ChatGPT, and I came up with this analysis, which is like, what are the things you'd have to believe for one to be better than the other, right? Well, in this particular area, like renting was a profoundly better financial decision. Like I was like, ah, shit, this is not good. Like, what kind of inputs do I change? Like, well, if you believe home prices will go up 12% per year, you might be better off buying a home. And so I was like, I reluctantly shared it, and they're like, that's great. I think we're going to buy a home. Like,
Wow.
Exactly.
all this stuff just doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It's like, and I think what you found, I forget the specific stats, and if you know them off the top of your head, I'd love to hear them again. But like the feeling of security, particularly for certain demographics, like the need to feel secure by being a homeowner was such a core driver.
I thought that was really interesting. I can't remember the stats off the top of my head, but there were two prominent buyer mindsets. And this is actually a stat I was trying to gather to go into a new research project around the psychology of money, but looking at safety and security, or I think it's stability and security, was one of the prominent and one that I fit into, absolutely. But looking at, I can't remember. I don't know
So
if you
I
remember
can
the
I
other.
can jump in.
Oh,
So
great.
88% of respondents fell into the stay secure archetype or the enjoy life archetype. And it was 53%, John. 53% stay secure, 35% enjoy life. And that represents 88% of millennials and Gen Z. So, right there, over half of the people want to be secure and stable, even if it may not work out at 12% annually in that market, to your point.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. And I think there's a lot that we can expand on through that. So that's why I kind of wanted to lay the foundation for that. But yeah, you think about what kinds of financial literacy materials are going to be most relevant. They're going to be different, I think, for those two archetypes. And I had a financial advisor meeting recently that I just loved this question, but he was like, are you the kind of person that wants to know what time it is or how the watch is made? And I was like, I want to know what time it is actually, and it helped relieve my overwhelm. I have so much overwhelm when it comes to financial information in general, and then it also, he was understanding what type of person I was, and I think we need these kinds of questions when we're actually talking with people. We may give all the same information, but it is going to hit people differently.
Well, I mean, what information is I mean, you put yourself in this category too. So if somebody wants to buy a home for the 53%, stability and security or the lifestyle, whatever, like how do you approach them? Like, I mean, it's very easy to give them the numbers, right? That's like in some ways much more cut and dry. This is the buy versus rent. Here's the analysis, blah, blah, blah. But it's harder to think about how you approach that more amorphous category. Like how do you even talk to it, or how do you encourage somebody to think about that choice?
Well, I do actually think the numbers are what's going to be most crucial in that bucket of people, which for me is interesting because I also easily get overwhelmed with the financial information. But when I was buying my home here in LA a few years ago, I created my own rent versus own analysis. Even though I have friends that have created these tools, I was still like, I need to see exactly every cell go through. Like, I need to know that this is working for me. And what it's going to look like over 5 to 10 years. So that's a category that I think we miss sometimes, is just like really looking at, okay, let's say things go terribly wrong and you want to move out in 2 years. What is that going to look like? What is this going to look like in 5 years? At a conservative estimate. And yeah, not the 12%, like let's look at 3%. And then I can evaluate and say like, okay, I may not come out on top here, but it looks good. For me, it did look really good financially, but I still would have made the decision, even if it were like on the edge, because it felt more stable and secure. On the dreamer side, the enjoy life side, you might want to be playing a bit more into the community benefits and how this is going to play into lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, that's me all day long. I joke, having worked in this industry for going on 14 or 15 years now, I always joke at parties like homeownership's a scam. And everybody's like, "Wait, aren't you working in that industry?" And I'm like, "No, homeownership's a scam unless you don't care about what happens to the financial outcome of the spreadsheet and you just want to experience something." Like, if you just want to experience it, then it's a brilliant experience. And so my wife and daughter wanted a house with a yard so that we could have dogs and we could do these other things and we could walk to her school instead of having to drive. And so once you factor those things in, like, mortgage insurance doesn't matter. It does, like, at that point it's like I'm getting a house or for my family to be happy and to have, the pets. And yeah, sure, I'll put as little down as possible. Just tell me what I have to do, because it doesn't need to work out for me. It already has. They're happy, that kind of thing. And I think we almost gloss over it too much. I think even in the American dream, you see these commercials, like you saw the sappy Rocket Mortgage commercial with that great song, Country Roads. Like, I love that song, but like, it hinted at it, but then still the American dream is still so wrapped up in wealth versus just like, no, you're gonna have a great time. Like, go buy a house in Detroit and have a great time. Get a couple dogs, a cat. Like, that I think is where I'm at.
Yeah, and I can't remember. I think it was a Redfin study that talked about how many millennials were buying homes to have a better life for their dogs, which I totally understand. But it was something around, yeah, just like thinking about what the American dream looks like. It's not the white picket fence all the time. It is absolutely for a lot of people, but it's also apartment buildings. It's like things look different, and I think millennials maybe more than Gen Z. I'd be curious to look at this on a generations standpoint, but Gen Z is a little bit more conservative, more wanting the security. Millennials tend to be a lot more like, hey, I want to enjoy life, and things can go really wrong, but like let's live life now, And so it's interesting to see how that changes with generations too.
Yeah, and I think Kristen, I kind of like the way you talked about the numbers. It's like, I think a lot of people are sort of aspiring for that lifestyle of being a homeowner, of having the place for their dog, so on and so forth. But they just don't want to fuck up. Like they want to be sure that they haven't made some profoundly stupid financial decision. And in some ways, like you need the numbers because that's what they kind of want to get really comfortable with. They're not going to trust the loan officer. They need to get it from somewhere. But what they're really aspiring for has nothing to do with like, are they going to earn 20% ROE over a 5-year holding period, right? It's very rare that, unless you're buying an investment property, it's very rare that you probably talk to a homeowner who even thinks about that after they've been in their house for 2 years.
That is so true. I actually, yeah, that's really interesting to think about it. I think I'm less wanting to always make the right financial decision. I just don't want to fuck up. Exactly what you were saying. Like that's, and I think providing that like calms the anxiety and allows me to make clear decisions around what are my priorities and values. Great. As long as I'm not fucking up over here, I'm okay. I can move forward with what I want in life. So, kind of goes back to that
Yep.
overwhelm and anxiety conversation.
Can you
Mm-hmm.
tie that into one of your takeaways from your research as well? Because I'm really curious about how do experts, brands, professionals use technology to allow those like overwhelm off ramps or to allow somebody to self select a different path of information or a different path of what they need? Because it does seem like you have to, one of your takeaways was like control for overwhelm, but how do we use technology to control for overwhelm? Because what I hear all the time from loan officers and real estate agents is like, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time to work with first time homebuyers the way I want to. I think a lot of loan officers and realtors desire to work with first time homebuyers over a long term relationship, but it's difficult to make the numbers work because they got deals to close. How do we think about that? Or what are your strategies and takeaways for that?
Yeah, so I've actually just recently put together a framework. I won't go through all of it, but it's called Trust. And it starts with one, tune in, T being tune in. But the idea of like, okay, is this person susceptible to overwhelm? Is this person like, what are they going to lean into? Are they enjoy life, whatever. And then the R being reflect and relate. And this is where I want to answer that, because if you are able to hear what direction they're going in, asking the watch question, how the watch is made, or what time it is, you can easily pivot into, now I'm going to reflect what I've heard back to you. What are the important things to you? And if you hit on what's important to them and the obstacles for them, like what keeps you up at night, you ask good questions that get to the point. You're not going to have to spend a ton of time with them, because if you didn't tune in first, you're providing them with a ton of information that now they have overwhelm, they have more skepticism. It's going to take a lot longer to pull them through that process. So that's one answer. Another would be also just like, where can you scale trust? And that would be looking at, I'm such a big fan of events and partnering with people who are already trusted. It doesn't have to be, that you do events all the time, but if you partner with organizations, young professional organizations, people that already have their trust, you're going to be able to move a lot faster with first time home buyers, because they're coming to you already feeling like, okay, this person gives to their community. They were trusted by this person, I think that makes things a little bit faster too.
Interesting. Before we take a quick break and pivot to some of what you work on with FirstHome IQ, one last thing from your study. We haven't mentioned it, although Jeremy did briefly allude to the Death Star, but like AI is clearly, I mean, that's got to be not even on the map a couple of years ago, and now is suddenly a sort of trusted source of information. I just think it's really fascinating. I'm just curious to get your thoughts on, even to the question Jeremy asked, like, I think people can really use ChatGPT as this kind of like, even when they're talking to somebody, they're like typing it in and like getting answers. So anyway, just curious to hear your views on where you see that going and whether or not it's a net positive or something we should be concerned about.
Yeah, this could have also been one of my favorite stats that I got from this study. But we found this in this August, the survey said that 61% would use AI tools like ChatGPT in gathering home buying information. But what's interesting about that is that in January of this year, that number was 35%. And so that might not be surprising because I know I use it a whole lot more. It's grown so much in the day to day. But I think that, like you said, goes to Jeremy's point too of like, okay, now to help people feel less overwhelmed, feel like they can go and validate information. Don't tell them not to go to ChatGPT. Tell them, like my doctor did, like, hey, take this information, go to ChatGPT, and this will be, helpful to you as you continue your process. I think it helps people feel confident when you are given the opportunity to validate what you're told. So that's one thought on that. But there's a lot of directions we could go around AI.
Totally. I mean, I've experimented with some of the AI tools to sort of do rent versus buy analysis, things like that. And like early on, it was bad because it's just not very good with, detailed financial analysis with those kind of inputs and assumptions. My guess is it's probably a lot better. And so in some ways you can trust it, but in some ways you need to be skeptical of the numbers. But on the other hand, I mean, and I guess I'm kind of wondering, there really isn't a housing AI tool out there that sort of controls for that and has like a special sort of lean towards housing. I just wonder whether or not that would be a profound introduction of a great tool.
That's interesting because a lot of the tools we see are focused on selling to lenders or selling to the industry to help them versus what you're saying, focus on the first time home buyer. I do think a lot of people are feeding their version of ChatGPT their personal information on a regular basis, and it does scenarios for them, health wise, financially, well, itineraries for things. And so I think what we'll see, John, is that ability to like co-pilot, to use I guess a pun unintended, but like to walk with that person in a way that we always imagine somebody should. ChatGPT can do that now. And as you get more sophisticated, it gets more sophisticated with you and gives you different scenarios. And I think it's pretty good at scenarios. You could say, change this and what happens. I mean, one of my criticisms of the industry for a long time is when we did surveys or research on our own for product strategy, the number one thing everyone wants to know is, what's my monthly payment? What's my monthly payment going to be? And it's like the last thing we can tell someone currently today. It's 3 days before closing. Sometimes it's even changing up until the day of closing. And it's the number one thing people care about. So if you could get a tool that walked alongside you and over the course of a year or 2 years, always was updating scenarios to tell you what you could afford and what you were going to pay on a monthly. I mean, that is a very different story for first time homebuyers.
And you've got a little bit of that with Trust Engine, Mortgage Coach. But again, that is technology fed to the industry. But I do think we're close to that. I also think it's super risky. I mean, if you I've tried these reports through like doing data analysis and things like that before, and it's never worked. This time, Perplexity worked for me, but every time I'd validate the data analysis with any of the others, Claude and ChatGPT, some things were wrong. So it's, but I think but Perplexity got everything right. So I thought that was interesting and this is the first report I've been able to do that. I've tried it every time since it was available. And then, but a couple months ago, I was doing a different report and it hallucinated a bunch of information. And I wrote for 6 hours based on hallucinated information.
Oh, no.
And then I realized, why do people keep referring to this nuclear winter of mortgage? No one's saying that. And then I realized, no, it just came up with that. So, so anyway, we don't want that happening in some scenarios run for consumers.
Well, if some entrepreneurial person could sort of really put some guidelines on it, use it to really power a consumer facing housing tool, maybe call it FirstHome AI, it might be a name. Anyway,
I'll get involved.
All right, let's take a quick break and we'll be back to talk more with Kristin. Built Rewards is a payment platform for housing that rewards members in their home and neighborhood. Built is the payment platform for over 5 million units because Built provides incredible value to residents and to property owners and managers that use it. Properties using Built have seen reduced turnover, increased usage of electronic payments, and fewer missed payments. And with our latest resident loyalty program, Built is changing the way that property managers can reward good behavior. Managers can assign rewards and benefits to tenants for a variety of activities like early lease renewal. If you're interested in learning more, go to alliance.builtrewards.com.
Welcome back. We're talking with Kristin Messerli of FirstHome IQ. Kristin, we just went through the NextGen Homebuyer Report and some of your new stats, but we want to talk about FirstHome IQ and the work you're doing with that organization. So obviously, as a board member, I have a personal interest in FirstHome IQ and what our mission is and who we're trying to serve. But I want to give you a chance to talk about, the organization. Why does the nonprofit exist, and how can people get involved?
Great. Yeah. Our whole focus is on bringing financial literacy and homebuyer education to the next generation. And we're doing that in a couple different ways. One, we're partnering with schools and nonprofits, bringing free curriculum and online courses to their students and teachers. And then the other way is through the industry. And so loan officers, real estate professionals, they can be involved in an ambassador program where we give them resources like presentation materials and social media content, email campaigns, anything they need to deliver education and just make it easier for them to be better community educators. So those are kind of the two directions that people can take to be involved. If you know a school, know a nonprofit, would love an introduction. If you'd like to volunteer, we can also help coordinate that. And if you'd like more information about the ambassador program, we do weekly information calls, and you can go to firsthomeiq.com/ambassador to sign up for one of those.
And you wrote all of the content. So you're actually delivering what is new and fresh content on these topics, both to the ambassadors in their community as well as to the schools and nonprofits. What's the reception been like? What are you hearing back from classrooms, and what are you hearing back from other community organizations?
Yeah, so it's funny that I wrote the content, but I did get feedback from other loan officers and industry professionals and got a lot of support around that. I wrote this with the person's brain in mind that has the overwhelm that we were talking about. I have so much overwhelm when it comes to this. I also have ADHD. And so the idea was like, how can we make this simple, engaging, provide people with good questions to ask their students? And I used to teach classes in high schools, and I know it's hard to keep people's attention. So anyway, the feedback has been really positive around that idea of like, we're getting them great information. People are remembering the information. The students' testimonials are the ones that like kind of kill me in this amazing way. Like they remember things about paying themselves first and just basic, concepts that are going to, I think, change the trajectory of their financial lives. But also they comment, the things I love are when we get volunteers to present to those classrooms. And we had one student talk about how he never sees, he's never had the chance to talk to someone successful, and how inspired he was, and just I think seeing people in the industry talk about things and make that connection has been really impactful. On the industry side, people love the opportunity. People who are passionate about education are just like, I found my home here. It's really fun to bring people like that together.
It's amazing what you've done with it. And I particularly like the creativity on that last thing that you mentioned, which is literally every single person says, oh, we really need to do more to educate people. And it's like, okay, but somebody's got to go do it. And you've kind of come up with this kind of creative ambassador program, ways to like give a variety of people to take what you've built and actually deliver it to someone. And that's created a distribution mechanism. I just kind of I'm curious to get your thinking on that. How's that working? Do you need more people to sign up? And to do that, you're having to go to housing conferences and like try to get people. Anyway, talk a little bit more about how you're growing that audience of distributors of the information.
Yeah. So one thing I didn't mention a second ago is the focus on first-time homebuyers. So we have a lot of loan officers who are wanting to give back in their communities and things like that. But the program is also developed to help people get more business with first-time homebuyers. And so one of the ways that we've been able to get the word out is by going to companies and saying like, "Hey, let us do a quick, 10-minute conversation about the state of first-time homebuyers and how to be involved with First Home IQ." You're able to give back by participating. All of your program fees then support our nonprofit work, but also you have a program that's really effective in reaching first-time homebuyers. And I've spent most of my career just focused on helping people win business with first-time home buyers. So we put a lot of those strategies to the test, had a lot of people involved in contributing to those, and so that's been the best way. The other way is absolutely like word of mouth. If someone knows like, oh, this person's really great with first-time home buyers, or this person is doing a lot of events or different things like that, they often refer them to us. But would love more opportunities to just share that message.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things, John, you remember my start in this was legal compliance. And I was just having a conversation with another board member from First Home IQ this week about how lenders can take more credit for investing in programs like this and reaching out, because it's always a question: what are you doing in the community? What are you doing to reach more people? And it's generally like a marketing patterns question a lot of times, but it also goes to what programs do you have? And it's one of these rare cases, in my opinion, where I think everybody gets something they need or want out of this. In other words, you can be doing these good things and you can be investing in students and in your loan officers in the field, and also get a lot of the things you need from what are you doing to invest in first time homebuyers? What are you doing to address affordability? What are you doing to invest in consumer confidence and competence? And so I've been really excited to have more of those conversations and see how lenders react. But so far, it's been good.
Yeah, and I think from a company perspective, for companies who partner with us, they are giving their loan officers tools to reach more first-time homebuyers, but they're also building a brand that says "I give back," and it builds trust with their consumers and their communities to say "I invest in this kind of thing." And also, yeah, and then there's the compliance direction. I think there's a lot of different angles that this really supports companies who want to invest in that.
Oh, I was just gonna say, is there any pushback relative to like the time frame we mentioned earlier? I always hear that about, I just wish I could work with people more and longer, but I can't. And so some of the people we're talking about, it could be 5 or 10 years before they are ready to enter the market. Is there anything you're hearing about that, or how you address it, or how people should think about it?
Yeah. So one, I think by working with First Home IQ, we take a lot of that load off. So I think there's a lot of time savings there. But two, there's different ways. Like you can go to a local high school or college, and you may get a few teacher loans. You may get a few parent loans. There's some things there. The others may take a little while to come through that funnel. But also, I think that builds your brand as a trusted resource in the community. But the other thing is you don't have to do any of that. You can just say like, I'm giving back to this by participating, and then fully focus on the 37-year-old first-time homebuyer, and be doing events and partnering with, local groups that are reaching that market. You can choose depending on where you are in your business and what you're really passionate about.
Yeah, I promise to throw you a couple curveballs, Kristen. So I'm gonna send one your way. So part of what I'm hearing is that, like, for an organization, it always feels good to give back. Education's a nice way to give back, right? I'm not a cold, heartless mortgage banker. On my way to hitting, going golfing, I stop by the high school and I teach an hour-long class, right? That ultimately, like, that's a feel-good thing. It's great. It's great for your business, but I think what we say about education, what we want to see, maybe there's two ways to think about it. One way is we want to see smarter, more confident, better decisions being made by consumers that ultimately better prepare them to be homeowners, maybe earlier, and make them more stable long-term homeowners. So like there's the actual impact of decisions. And then I think from the business side, I think the other way to think about it is like, is this going to effectively increase my business? Am I going to close more loans? Am I going to convert more people to homeowners by using those? So both of those things, by the way, are really, really very hard things to do. I mean, let's just set the baseline. It's hard to do that. But I imagine like you don't approach this to like make mortgage bankers feel better about themselves. Like you want to see those impacts. So can you talk about that? And like, are you seeing those impacts? How do you measure? Like, is it even possible to measure? Are you just assuming? Anyway, that's my
It is
curveball for you.
on our roadmap for Q4 to really drill into better metrics. But we do anecdotally get a lot of people talking about, like, I did, this webinar series and got a lot of, went to one effective campaign we did was people went to their current database and said, if you have kids, bring them and whoever you want to join. And they talked about home ownership and through that series. But there's different campaigns like that where people then say, I got X many deals from doing that thing, or the school outreach one. I never expected that to be something where you actually generate deals from it. But we have a lot of ambassadors who talk about them getting deals from the schools and, like I said, the parents. And there's definite improvements. But I do think you need to have both the desire to increase your business, but also the desire to have an impact, like, or be leading with education, at least. Like, if you're not passionate about education, it's probably not going to be a great fit for you. There's probably other funnels that are going to be better to pursue. But I will say, I think if you want to reach the next generation, education has to be a big part of that. If you want to, build trust and that type of thing. But the other thing is we've seen a lot of people build realtor relationships through bringing information about, like, saying, I'm a FirstHome IQ ambassador. I have this cool program. We'd love to share some of the research and some of the do collab on some presentations. And that's gotten a lot of great new relationships with realtors. So definitely hard to measure and very open to feedback on how we pursue that. But we do surveys and people have been responding positively.
I think you've answered that really. I mean, you answered it just about the best way you can. And a lot of people try to do this, and it's like I said, it's just really, really hard. And the best thing that you can do is at least try to do a lot of education and hope that it has those downstream impacts. So I guess one other aspect of that, and something that you and I have talked a lot about in the past, is that education becomes really, really impactful when it's personalized and timely. Like, you tell me what I should do when I need to know, and it's customized to who I am. And advancements in technology are making that more and more possible. Like, in some ways, you want to prepare people to be open to and receptive, or to have a baseline of education, so that when they get to making a decision, they're not totally, to your point, overwhelmed. They know who to turn to, and then they can get that personalized and timely information. So I'm just curious, like you mentioned sort of early education, maybe even at the realtor stage. Do you see FirstHome IQ kind of moving along with the consumer, like creating those sort of like super timely education opportunities?
Do you mean like where we fit into their financial journey, like starting? Because
Yeah, I guess I mean two things. Like, one is like, you can tell a high schooler you should save money and build your credit. Like, those are probably good lessons at that age. But at some point, like, I have an inspector walking through my home that I'm buying, and I have no idea what to do. And so now I need right now, I need to know what the hell the inspector is supposed to be doing for me, and what I'm supposed to do when I get this like 80-page PDF. Like that's the sort of part of the financial journey that becomes super practical. Like, you have to make a decision now. When you need information, what you heard in high school, you're not going to retain it at that moment.
Yeah, exactly. I think right now we have courses that follow from, basic money management, psychology of money, relationship with money, that type of thing, all the way through credit and then debt management. But anyway, then you get into home ownership. And I think we have a rent wisely portion. We have a rent versus own. And that's when you're in that more decision-making time. And then you might want to, what we have right now is just a home ownership, and it takes you through the steps of buying a home, all of that. But I would like to split that up into, here's general understanding of buying your first home. And then, like you said, I'm now buying a home right now. What do I do about the Like, what inspections should I have? And I think you're hoping that you're going to have a good, realtor that's walking you through that, and loan officer, but you want that third party validation of information. And so hopefully we can bring that into the mix too.
One of the things you both just made me think of also, which is like the more you write, you become a better, more articulate writer. The more you do podcasts or whatever, the better you can make your point in a succinct way. It feels to me like doing this education that John was asking about and the way in which First Home IQ approaches it, I get better at spotting who is the stay secure home buyer, who is the enjoy life. How do I hear these flags or see these flags? So it should actually really make you more intuitive and at noticing some of these things and then quickly implementing how do I respond to that and how do I do the trust framework that you laid out earlier. The more at bats I have across those students, across those potential customers and referral partners, it's almost really has a nice cycle to it in that regard.
Exactly. I think the more that you're paying attention to that, you absolutely will spot those things, and it will make it easier and faster for you to communicate. And then one of the last T in that trust framework is trust together. And I think you never want to miss the collaboration piece of all of this. Like, if you are, as you go through this, you're going to learn how to communicate better as you go along. Everyone has and will continue. This will always be evolving. But I think now we're in a really crucial time in the market and the way consumers are, that they want to see you as a collaborator more than anything. So that's just one thought as you think about like how we spot and shift our education approach.
Well, also, I think it extends to your point about timing. I think it extends to the real potential threat that first time homebuyers go away from saving for home ownership. I mean, I think we underestimate that threat often because it's so intuitive to the people who work in this industry that people will buy homes. But more data we're seeing on, the research on personal finance tends to be that people are going away from saving for a home in a lot of cases because they feel like it's out of reach. So the other thing is just as an investment in the core mission of the industry is to say, if that's a threat, how do we combat it? And I feel like starting with these, personalized, customized in community resources to say, hold on a second, here's what you're probably hearing. Here's how you have to think about this, and reframing home ownership in the next generation could also really be important 5 years from now without, but doing that work now will make that true or not, depending.
Yeah. And you're validating what they are feeling. It's like, yeah, I think reframing and validating is really important too.
Yeah, and that reframing and validating. One thing that I wanted to bring up in the first segment, but I'll bring it up now because it's relevant, is sort of house hacking and sort of different approaches to buying a home. One of the things I've worked on in the past is like, should people use shared equity investments as a way to get an additional down payment to buy a home? And God, it's just like first of all, to speak about overwhelm, like it's just such an abnormal concept, which is why I think like co-buying feels a little bit more intuitive. But anyway, I think it's going to take a lot of education to normalize some of those approaches so that people don't feel like, oh, I'm trying to do this a way that's not typical. Is that an area that you've sort of built out, like helping to normalize like co-buying? Or I mean, fixer upper is probably not as strange, but like anyway, what are your thoughts in that area?
Yeah, we're trying to gather partners that we think are great in this area. Like Crib Equity is one that has partnered with First Home IQ, and I think the more that we can have things that are like, okay, here's a resource for you to explore this option, and then building that out into the courses are a place that is a reference point. But I would like to figure out where else we can put this. Maybe it's having our ambassadors sharing those resources, and doesn't mean that everyone follows that. Maybe they come out with a conventional, traditional approach, but they are still getting in the door first because they realize like, oh, maybe there is an opportunity for me to buy a home. And so I think those are really crucial right now. It's just in our courses and in our partner section of our community, but there's a lot more I want to do with that. I think that's a really important part of this, in opening that door to home ownership.
Yeah, right on. Kristen, one of the things we like to ask at the end is you're obviously working all day, every day, building this business, building the nonprofit, and doing what you're doing. And we're curious, have you come across anything in the last few months or a year that you think an entrepreneur or a founder should be working on? So in other words, if you weren't doing this, what advice? We have a lot of folks listening to this, want to get into the industry, want to make a difference. Do you have anything that you're like, this business should exist? If I wasn't doing this, I would want to work on this, or I would recommend somebody dig in. Because, John's throwing it out there that somebody should take ChatGPT and make it the first time home buyer scenario desk. That could be the answer, but I'm curious.
First Home AI. First Home AI.
First Home AI. I'm curious if you have anything that has hit you recently. They're like, man, that's really interesting, or that's something somebody should
I have
be working
so
on.
many things, and I have a notes app of business ideas. So but one that comes to mind, maybe this exists because I actually haven't researched this yet, but because I've been doing a lot of work on our budgeting resources and making that more accessible. It's always been an overwhelming thing for me, but people buy a ton of stuff on Amazon, and that is not, it's just like an Amazon line item whenever you look at that as a, in your budget or your bank account. So is there a way to put things like that into an app that would like integrate with your budgeting app as well, or something that would like list, okay, you spent 50% of that on groceries, So that's a random one. The other area I think I'd want to work, I'd want to work on probably something credit related, or I am in a tenancy in common, as you guys know, and I think looking at the co-buying space is really interesting.
All great ones. Kristin, it's been so great to see you. It's been awesome reading your report. I found it super insightful. I know I'm taking a lot of things away for what I do in my day-to-day. I'm sure Jeremy would say the same. So really, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great chatting with you guys.
All right, everyone, that does it for the episode. We would love to hear from you. So send us an email at podcasts@thehousinginsiders.com. If you have anything interesting that you want to share with us, or even if it's uninteresting, please send us a note. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a review.
And always hit subscribe so that our episodes find their way into your feed. Share them so that we can make more of these episodes. And thank you, Keenan Chen, for our music.